I'm very pleased to host the United Nations Association's leadership from across the U.S. here at the State Department. As you know, I've been a strong supporter of the UN Association and of all the work that you do. And in my current position in this administration, I've had a good chance to meet many of you in your chapters around the country. So I've really enjoyed the chance to meet many of you at home with your groups, with your chapters, and to talk about issues you find interesting on some of the topics that we're all working on. Also, as you know, that we are also, this is our hometown here in Washington. We also collaborate with our chapter right here in town. Each spring, we collaborate with the department's largest and finest Model UN activity. And I particularly thank Karen, right there you are, Karen. Special thanks to Karen Milhauser and the Global Classrooms for their terrific work right here in the National Capital area. So great to see you. And I also understand that there are 2 new chapters in Detroit and New Orleans. So that's great to hear as well. So congratulations on the new chapters as well. Now, I know, of course, that the UN Association works hard to tell the positive story of the UN's work worldwide. And we in the U.S. government appreciate the need to engage and combat misperceptions out there, and to explain that although the UN system is far from perfect, it is in the America's national interest for national security, foreign policy, and economic reasons to engage deeply and broadly with the UN. Now, clearly, we engage in this conversation from a common point of departure. That is, we all believe that U.S. multilateral engagement advances U.S. foreign policy and produces real results on the ground and reinforces our unique global role. So today, rather than, as it's preached to the choir, I would like to give you an update from the administration's point of view of key multilateral priorities, to talk about some of the real successes and to talk about some of the real current, serious, ongoing challenges. Now, not surprisingly, on the top of the list of immediate concerns, very much of our preoccupations today is Syria. Now, this is clearly on all of our minds, and clearly we're having to see, unfortunately, the latest round of a, well, despicable, outrageous violence against civilians, which continues. And just today, you will have seen the statement issued today by Joint Special Envoy Annan, raising concerns about the most recent shelling and use of mortars and other heavy equipment in towns with trapped civilians. And you will know, and of course there are too many similar situations to, that we've seen in recent weeks, but you'll also know some of the efforts to respond to this as well. Just 10 days ago, the Human Rights Council had its latest special session to address the ongoing human rights violations. Of course, at that session, we authorized effort to look into the massacre in Hula, in which more than 100 Syrian civilians, including children, were killed. And as you know, you had a series of countries standing up and condemning the worsening situation, and the Human Rights Council tried to lay a path for further investigation in Syria. The Commission of Inquiry, which you know is already created in Syria, which was established by the Human Rights Council, has now been authorized to look into the situation in Hula if they can get into the country. But the idea is to try to get real experts to look at, from a forensic point of view, what we're actually seeing in light of the gross human rights violations being committed by the Assad regime, and to try to put greater pressure on Assad. And we hope that this commission will finally be granted access to Syria. Now, even as the Commission of Inquiry continues its work, we continue to support the efforts being made by Kofi Annan, the joint UN Arab League envoy. But this latest atrocity only reinforces our view that further action by the Security Council is needed if the international community stands any chance of pressing Assad to end his assault on civilians, and if we are to retain any prospect for a peaceful end to the crisis in Syria. Now, all of you who followed this issue and know the relative stalemate on Syria in the Security Council know that getting harsher measures approved will continue to be difficult. Russia and China supported the establishment of the UN military observer mission, but they, of course, have twice vetoed the Security Council resolutions and efforts at tougher measures. And the Russian government continues to deny the clear facts on the ground and the responsibility of government forces for the killing of Syrian civilians, somehow claiming a false equivalency between the regime and the opposition. So we'll continue to engage the Russians and others as we look for a way forward. In the meantime, in addition to the Human Rights Council action I just mentioned, we're taking a number of other steps to put pressure on the Syrian regime to end the violence and to address the serious humanitarian consequences. Last month, the United States and a number of countries working in coordination further isolated the Assad regime by expelling Syrian diplomats. 2 weeks ago, the Treasury Department expanded U.S. sanctions against Syria by freezing the assets of another Syrian banking institution to tighten the economic pressure on the regime. And to date, the United States has contributed more than $40 million to international efforts, primarily, as you know, undertaken by UN agencies, funds, and programs to address the humanitarian needs of the approximately 1 million Syrians inside the country and the more than 78,000 refugees who have fled. This approach of broad engagement, as the President has said, of mobilizing the international community to take collective action has been part and parcel of how the Obama administration has taken on a number of foreign policy challenges as well. If we look at one of the most important issues we face today, nuclear nonproliferation and Iran, one of our most difficult nonproliferation challenges is, of course, also an area for multilateral cooperation. We've succeeded over the past 3 years in building a strong international coalition that is determined to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. We've worked with the P5+1 partners on a dual track using pressure, including unprecedented UN Security Council sanctions, to encourage Iran to fulfill its international obligations, while at the same time seeking to engage Iran to find a solution. We applaud the monitoring and analysis being undertaken by the International Atomic Energy Agency, but we'll ultimately have to measure success by Iran's actions and whether it addresses the international community's serious concerns in a transparent way. But looking around the globe, there are other challenges as well. The tensions between Sudan and South Sudan remain on the Security Council agenda. In Sudan, we've seen recent positive developments as the forces of South Sudan have completely pulled out of Abyei. And we think it's important that the North complete its withdrawal of all of its police elements, including the oil police, a point also made by a number of colleagues in recent discussions at the Security Council. We also welcome the fact that the two parties have returned to the negotiating table in late May. And while there's several very difficult issues there is a potential for some progress. And these talks, which were facilitated by the African Union's high-level implementation panel, recently concluded just last week. During this time, the parties convened 2 important sessions, the Joint Political and Security Mechanism and the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee. And the African Union high-level implementation panel has tentatively set the date to reconvene of June 21st. Finally, also in the issues of Sudan and South Sudan, we remain gravely concerned about the humanitarian situation in South Kordofan and Blue Nile states. There has been no progress in terms of the government of Sudan allowing open humanitarian access, including to rebel areas. In places like Sudan, few sites are more welcome to men and women in countries recovering from armed conflict than UN peacekeepers. But in addition to their critical contribution to global security, we also recognize that UN peacekeepers make an important contribution to U.S. national security, one that has increased as their roles have grown more difficult and complex. And sadly, in this context, we must note that 7 peacekeepers were killed in Côte d'Ivoire just last Friday. UN peacekeepers today have to address some of the world's hardest and most challenging security situations, whether in Darfur, Congo, Haiti, or in Côte d'Ivoire. By protecting civilians and working to prevent an end to armed conflicts, they bring stability to parts of the world that for too long have known too little of it. And because they do this at a fraction of the cost of sending U.S. troops, it means that we do not have to choose between doing it ourselves or doing nothing. The United States is the largest supporter of UN peacekeeping activities, just as we are the largest contributor to the UN budget generally. And over the past 3 years, we've worked hard to help enhance the effectiveness of UN peacekeeping. We use our influence to ensure that peacekeeping operations have the full political support of the Security Council, especially when they face challenging deployments or hostile host governments. We work to ensure that UN peacekeeping missions are given mandates they can achieve and that they have the personnel and equipment needed to achieve those mandates. And we train thousands of peacekeepers every year and supported partner country training efforts for even more. Even as peacekeeping missions face continuing challenges, we're especially concerned about Sudan and South Sudan at this point, as I've indicated. We believe firmly that this investment reaps excellent returns for global security and for the national security of the United States. In so many cases, UN peacekeeping missions are deployed after conflict has subsided, oftentimes after terrible atrocities have been committed in difficult situations. And we're trying to look at many different ways to address these issues. One of the areas is also to look at how we can improve the organization within the United States for addressing these issues. So as you know, President Obama has taken action, including by establishing the High-Level Atrocities Prevention Board, to lay the foundation for a stronger, better organized response by the United States and the international community when we get warning of mass atrocities and genocide. A core tenet of this administration's leadership on atrocity prevention is the importance of working with partners in the international community, especially with the United Nations system at all stages of the conflict spectrum. The State Department's first Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, or QDDR, emphasizes preventing and resolving armed conflict, and we are working across the UN system to explore new ways to promote these goals. Of course, we'll continue our long-held support for accountability for international crimes, but our aim with this new emphasis on atrocity prevention is to present policymakers with better prevention options before the costs of action rise and before the killing begins. Alongside our improved efforts to prevent the most heinous crimes, we're also broadening our support for human rights worldwide, including through robust engagement at the United Nations Human Rights Council. We see our multilateral engagement with the HRC as an important means of advancing universal values that Americans hold dear. And since we won our seat at the Human Rights Council in 2009, we've helped transform the Council to a far more effective body, one that can respond to pressing human rights situations in real time with concrete action and a unified voice. Since 2011, we've had a significant number of successes at the Human Rights Council. We launched commissions of inquiry to investigate human rights violations in Syria, Libya, and Cote d'Ivoire. The HRC appointed a special rapporteur to monitor and report human rights violations in Iran. And last June, the Human Rights Council took a historic first step of recognizing the continuing challenge of securing the human rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, who in too many parts of the world continue to be denied their fundamental rights and to be the victims of violence. Given the administration's commitment to LGBT rights, we will continue to work with partners around the world to look for further measures in the UN system to truly protect the human rights of all men, women, children, regardless of sexual orientation, because we believe it is everyone's right to have the fullest measure of dignity and rights. The Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review, or UPR, process has become one of its most significant innovations. The UPR requires every country in the UN system, whether or not they are HRC members, to present their human rights records every 4 years. Other member states pose questions and state their concerns. It's the first international mechanism whereby even the most repressive countries subject themselves to open scrutiny. Now that we're in the second round of UPRs, it's an important juncture for the Human Rights Council, making sure the UPR process is used to maximally advance human rights, to ensure that countries actually implement the recommendations made during the first round of UPRs is one of the many reasons why we're running for a second term on the Human Rights Council. Now, hope we have that kind of support when we actually go for the vote in New York. Now, there's continued to be a lot of work at the Human Rights Council, and its flaws are very well known, but we think it's important to be there. Even as we fought to expand human rights protections to all peoples, we're also working to advance global health. We provide approximately 40% of the total global development assistance for health, and historically, no country has done more to advance the health of men, women, and children across the globe than the United States. From working to eradicate smallpox, to providing nearly 4 million people last year with life-saving antiretroviral treatments through the PEPFAR program, to bringing life-saving vaccines to children across the globe. President Obama has been committed to expanding that historical leadership on global health. So we're building on existing successes, programs like PEPFAR and the President's Malaria Initiative, but we're also taking these and other programs to the next level by addressing the entire health picture, including maternal and child health, infectious diseases, nutrition, neglected tropical diseases, safe water, sanitation, and hygiene. To make these programs effective and sustainable, we're combining best practices with an emphasis on country ownership. American leadership on global health reflects core values that we all hold dear: the desire to save lives and to help people no matter where they live, and give themselves and their children a better life. Highlighting that American benevolence through action on global health contributes to U.S. global leadership, and it also supports our overall foreign policy. But given how interconnected the world has become, the administration's leadership on global health also helps protect Americans. As you well know, every day, millions of people step off of airplanes and enter the United States. By working to build a global, comprehensive system for monitoring health threats and coordinating international responses, we help keep Americans safe from infectious diseases that pay no heed to international borders. Americans recognize then the importance of the contribution to global health. And advances in global health also help strengthen fragile states, which might otherwise prove cauldrons for transnational challenges, from international crime to refugee flows. And a healthy citizenry promotes economic development and global economic growth, since a sick population cannot live up to its economic potential, a fact that's even more important when it comes to encouraging women's full participation in all aspects of economic, social, and political life. On the issue of global health, our work in multilateral organizations has been crucial, because although we may have a limitless supply of global health challenges, we certainly don't have limitless resources. And given the irrelevance of borders to infectious disease and the growing challenge of non-communicable diseases around the developing and developed world, partnership is key to dealing with evolving health challenges. That's why we place such an emphasis on working multilaterally on public health, just as we have on other foreign policy challenges. We remain the largest donor to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and we've shown strong leadership at the World Health Organization as it works on infectious disease outbreaks and response, pandemic threats, and coordinating health efforts in emergency and disaster situations. We've also pressed the international community following the high-level session at last year's UN General Assembly to address the increasingly important challenge posed by non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, diabetes, and cancer. NCDs, non-communicable diseases, are responsible for more than 60% of the deaths worldwide, more than 35 million people annually, and 80% of whom are in developing or middle-income countries. We're working across the U.S. government with partners worldwide to translate the high-level political support that we saw back in New York last September into global concerted action. In the UN system, we're engaging not only the World Health Organization on NCDs, but also other UN specialized agencies as well. We're focused on radiation technologies for cancer and the efforts at IAEA, for example, working on infant and child health at UNICEF, and promoting healthy local food through the World Food Program, just to name a few aspects in this effort. Similarly, the administration has taken on global leadership in food security, as you know well. Not only is it the right thing to do additionally to promote global food security, which benefits the U.S. security and the economy, that you also know about our $3.5 billion Feed the Future food security program, which is helping to leverage the greater global effort to address one of the root causes of poverty. There are so many other areas where the Obama administration is working through the United Nations system to help advance important U.S. interests with direct and positive benefits for the American people. And as you know, if you make a cell phone call, you benefit from the work of the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. Many of you will fly home or fly internationally, and of course the International Civil Aviation Organization is important to global aviation to help keep you safe and secure. There's a long list of such examples. Given the importance of all this work, we've continued to think that exerted and concerted global leadership is important. And we think part of that is making sure that the institutions are strong enough to bear the weight that we're going to put on them. So we continue important work on reform and enhancements across the UN system. We're aiming to ensure that the United Nations and UN agencies can be as strong as we need them to be. We're helping improve oversight, accountability, transparency, and making certain that our contributions are used efficiently and effectively. Much remains to be done to help the UN system catch up with the fast pace of change in today's world. But the United States has been a committed partner for UN reform and will continue to be so. I've mentioned today a number of the foreign policy challenges where the Obama administration has employed multilateral engagement to advance U.S. interests. That approach for achieving our immediate foreign policy goals increases our influence and ability to achieve future goals down the line. The U.S. emphasis on engagement and seeking shared solutions to common challenges has been one of the key means by which we have restored confidence in America's global leadership. And with it, we've increased our ability to advance U.S. foreign policy goals and to try to grapple with some of the most difficult and complex issues. And that is why we appreciate your hard work and look forward to the continued collaboration with the UN Foundation, with UNAUSA, to persist in building an understanding of the important ideals and the work of the UN among American people. So again, I'm delighted that you're here in the department today. Very glad you had it sounds like an excellent annual meeting, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Yes, no, I applaud the work that you all done through the Human Rights Council on behalf of LGBT rights. But I wonder, could you be more specific about what specific resolutions have been passed? Has this encompassed kind of a full spectrum from protecting people against death, imprisonment, torture on one end, but also recognizing immigration rights for same-sex spouses and asylum rights, other aspects? Lastly, I guess with the President's recent statements in support of gay marriage, are there implications for our foreign policy, for our interactions with the United Nations?
Right, thank you for the question. To first off, just to recap some of the activities more specifically over the past year, that there were several steps. We thought it was important. We'd never had a resolution on LGBT issues or really a broad-based statement by the multinational community. So the first stage was actually to have a statement at the Human Rights Council. This is part of our effort to make the Human Rights Council more flexible. That initially there were only resolutions, and we said there should be more vehicles for an expression of a view of member states. So the first thing we looked at was to use a statement, because a statement can both be signed on and supported by the actual members of the Human Rights Council, but non-members can also sign up to support a statement. And so the United States and several other countries were involved in having a statement passed last year, and again, so more countries could show support. That helped build support and help member states recognize that, yes, they could go take on what might domestically be a very controversial issue and have international support that helped the adoption of the resolution last year, a year ago this summer, which was the first time we'd ever had a resolution at the Human Rights Council on LGBT issues. The focus particularly was on victims of violence, and to say that people should not be victims of violence because of their sexual orientation. And so the focus within the Human Rights Council has been this line of dealing with violence, and criminalization has been the focus of much of the efforts in the Human Rights Council. As you know, the Secretary of State also gave a major address in December at the time of International Human Rights Day to talk about LGBT rights being human rights and the importance. And it was, you maybe you've seen it, it was held in the main hall in Geneva, which is almost never used. That's the big hall. That's the big hall. That, of course, was originally the League of Nations Hall. It's been beautifully redone. It seats 2,000 people. But the Secretary wanted to give a major global address. She said, this is the place to do it, Geneva, to go and talk about human rights. And it was packed, absolutely packed. Full credit to Mission Geneva that worked hard. I think they had 4 days' notice to make sure people knew about the event and do it. But that was, again, an important statement as a national government. And now the question is so what's the appropriate next step? Because it's important that there is and really was a global coalition, and many member states took leadership in their regional efforts. So, for example, the South Africans were quite important in working with the Africa Group to help the adoption of the resolution last year. And so now one of the current questions, as you know, the Human Rights Council session is opening in Geneva, is what is the appropriate next step? You've already identified there are many other issues to take on board: immigration rights issues, asylum issues. Some of those are more in the purview of national governments, as opposed to the direct realization of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But that said, we're trying to think about what's the appropriate next mechanisms this year and into the future. Also, we're trying to think about what's the appropriate things to be doing in the Human Rights Council, what might be done at the General Assembly, trying to think about how you keep moving forward. There's always a lot of work to do, but we're trying to think about in a logical way how to move forward. Thank you. Please,
Esther, we're always delighted to hear you. You're a great friend, and thank you for the support of these facilities. When you've spoken to us before, around the country and here in Washington, you've always given us a rundown on the status of treaties. You omitted that this year. This is of great interest and concern to us. We're all going to the Hill tomorrow. We would love to be in sync with what you are advocating. We're all geared up for the Law of the Seas. We know that it's next, so we'd like to move a step ahead. We have a tremendous amount of support and interest in CEDAW, and it's always, well, it's not the time to do it. Considering there's supposed to be some kind of a war against women, not only is it politically advantageous, maybe for some people to be advocating it, but we would love to see something coming from the State Department and the White House and be allies of that. And of course, we're embarrassed now to be the last country in the world that has not supported the rights of the child. So I wondered if you could give us a little status report about what can be done rather than, and maybe begin and take it into the next term. Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, of course, the treaty list is extremely important and part of the ongoing work of the State Department to advance treaties that we think are in the national interest of the United States. As you've already indicated, the Law of the Sea is the top of the list. Obviously, when you have the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense together, shoulder to shoulder, reminding everyone why there is bipartisan, long-standing support for this treaty, that's quite significant. And that will be the real focus for the next several months. As you know, you have to do these one at a time, and so that the immediate focus, if you say so today, Monday, what is the focus over the next several months? That will be it. Of course, this administration also, as you know, signed the Disabilities Convention, and we think is extremely important here to see how we can move in this area as well. So those are some of the areas I would focus on, but clearly, Law of the Sea is sort of top of the list of efforts to move forward in the immediate period. But I know you'll hear a lot more about that tomorrow. Thank you.
And what about the others? What can be said now so that we can push them forward? Because we've always heard from you, you support them. We know the President supports them, Secretary of State supports them, but we're not moving on them.
Well, I would say we have obviously continue to be strong supporters of the measures both of CEDAW, and we recognize the importance of the rights of the child, and looking at how ways to, as we continue to support the goals and values behind them in a national capacity. But I think in terms of the immediate confirmation, the focus will be on Law of the Sea in terms of the immediate work. And then I'll come back over the set, and I'll keep going around so we get balance. Please.
One of the courses of action recommended by some members of Congress is to arm opposition groups with regards to problems like Syria and, of course, with regards to the issue of Libya. What is your assessment of the prospects, dangers, and opportunities of the United States and allies arming such opposition groups?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Indeed, there are a variety of ideas that are out there about Syria. We think it's the first is the question of how do you actually create a situation when the Syrian people are able to express their choices for their government. The president last August made it clear he thought it was time for Assad to go, and that he should not be part of a longer term transition in Syria. And we think there's obviously there's a diplomatic track. We think there may be an economic sanctions track. Obviously, we have significant bilateral by the U.S. with other countries sanctions efforts. We think there should be multilateral sanctions efforts. We also think there should be a Security Council resolution. But on this question of arming armed groups, there are, of course, serious issues to keep in mind. The first question, whether in Syria and elsewhere, is that you often have multiple groups and that are maybe disunified and maybe unclear where they are, what their overall goals are, and who their additional partners would be. You have to be very conscious about what you're supplying to what may be very disparate groups with a whole range of views. As you know, the United States is providing non-lethal assistance to the nonviolent opposition. And there we're looking particularly at some of the communications devices, medical support, and other things that the Syrians have said that they want support for, as I say, for the nonviolent opposition. Other countries may make different choices, but we think that we have to look at what's the impact of increasing the militarization of a situation which may unfortunately not actually help civilians in the way people may desire.
Yeah, Jeff Laurenti, Princeton Trenton Area Chapter of UNA, and long associations. Esther, the administration has done wonders in draining the poison from the International Criminal Court debate and the Washington rabid hostility, paranoia about it. What's been the debate inside the administration on the question of a Syria referral, at least prospectively from this day forward, so that it might be useful as a possible deterrent and as leverage for the Russians to deal with Damascus? And having mentioned ICC, how is it that 3.5 years into the Obama administration, what was the happiest moment in John Bolton's life, the day he delivered the letter to the UN for Bush saying that this administration will not recognize Clinton's signature, in effect, how is it that that is still not rescinded? What's been the debate inside the administration on rescinding that infamous letter?
Well, we just keep moving right past it, you know. That, as you know, we've really focused on what are really the practical measures and practical uses and how can we, as an observer, be an active observer. And so that, as you know, we now attend the states parties conferences, and I credit my good friends Howard Koh, the legal advisor, and Steve Rapp, the Ambassador for War Crimes, who usually attend on behalf of the United States. And so we actually go and are part of the discussion, debate, and use of the instruments there, and actively intellectually involved in those discussions. But also we try to look at what are the practical places where it's appropriate maybe to have a citation to the ICC. And indeed, you know, there will be situations where the United States has voted for resolutions and other measures which have included the words ICC in them. Most recently, in the resolution of the Human Rights Council, there's a reference. The references to what the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, has said. It's basically effectively a quote at the end of the resolution. But I think the thing is also to think about what's actually practical for a specific situation. We strongly support measures of accountability, but we assess in each situation what's the right mix for that particular situation. What's the right mix of deterrent? What's the right mixture of making sure that you're gathering information for accountability to look at how that actually works? So, but at least I think we're trying to at least approach it in a more rational, less ideological approach, and hopefully that's a contribution as well. Lady two. I'm sorry, if you hit the mic button, thanks.
Is that better? I'm Elizabeth with San Francisco chapter. I was wondering how much emphasis is being placed on mental health issues globally, in particular PTSD, and in the case of child soldiers, in the case of refugees and those displaced due to conflict, also losses due to health issues and terminal health issues such as HIV/AIDS, and in addition, veterans. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are several different categories, because as you say, the impact of mental health issues are extremely important in many different aspects of human endeavor. I'll just cite a few. One, of course, children are in conflict. Indeed, that, of course, we're strong supporters of the special rapporteur, the special representative of the Secretary General on children and armed conflict, and looking at which is supposed to be a mechanism to look in a structured way at the impact on children of armed conflict. But not only is there that mechanism, we also find as you look at the leitmotif going through some of the work at UNICEF, some of our own bilateral work on dealing with children and families in conflict situations, that understand the impact and how you can help with longer-term medical approaches is important. There's undoubtedly more that can be done. We tend to focus usually on the physical well-being. And so there may be areas where we need to think more and learn more about what might be appropriate from the mental health area. So there may be some suggestions we should take on board. But I think also you mentioned, refugees and refugee populations, I think is also a very important area as well, where that looking again at the whole health picture might be particularly acute, because people are in particularly stressful situations of displacement, refugees and IDPs. I highlight, of course, the work I highlight in terms of support for AIDS and for both medical and antiretrovirals, but also I think there could be a greater aspect on the mental health area there as well. And I'd have to look into what other aspects, if there are things we should take on board. But I would also flag that I'd mentioned the importance of non-communicable diseases as well. And I think that, and why we think that's important as well, because we're realizing that the effects on populations is so large. And that under that rubric, that we're trying to look at it's probably the most dynamic area where we're trying to look at some of the issues you raise. And as I said in my opening remarks, there was the high-level session in New York last year, but there was also at the World Health Assembly last May an effort to focus on NCDs, and this May as well. And it's part of our ongoing effort to expand how we work on non-communicable disease. And that's an ongoing effort. Even if it's not in the headlines, it's actually something that we're seeing as a major and continuing initiative.
Just a quick follow-up, in terms of also reorienting people who have been exposed to trauma into society. Is there any work particularly being done in that area?
There may be, but I am not familiar with a detailed program that we could, but we could probably get more information and get it back to Anea on that area. So
Thank you.
Colleagues, if we just make no, thank you. There's a lady over here.
I'm Alice Dalla from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I am interested in the Arms Trade Treaty as it affects women and civilian populations particularly. Will this administration support language in the Arms Trade Treaty that would prohibit transfers of arms amongst nations that would have a significant chance of being used against civilian populations or to commit human rights abuses?
Well, we're looking at the ATT, an overall package, and trying to look at what combination of language that we might really want to work on. But we're still deep in grappling with what's going to be the mix of approaches on ATT. That is one of many concerns that we're looking at within the negotiations of the Arms Trade Treaty. Please.
You talked about World Health Organization, and I'm particularly concerned about AIDS and HIV in Africa. And I know the ABC plan has been proposed as the most effective thing, but there's been a lot of opposition to the C part, the contraceptive part. And I wondered if this administration is promoting family health and family planning through use of contraception in Africa. It's a way of reducing population growth and also preventing AIDS.
Well, this administration has tried to have a more holistic approach, both in our own bilateral programs, and of course we've tried to fund UNFPA as well. Now we always face a challenge every year, our budget year, that we don't usually always get everything that we request for UNFPA. But we're trying, as I say, to cover all aspects. We think all aspects are actually particularly important. So yes, we've taken a broader view than others in recent years.
Thank you for your hospitality today. I'm Mel Boynton from Southern California. You and Secretary Clinton were very supportive of the UN Women Initiative. And I was curious, do you know what the funding is that eventuated for UN Women from the United States?
Yes, I'll just take a moment, just give people more context. As you know, UN Women was the organization that brought together 4 existing organizations to try to create a single unified organization advancing gender equality worldwide, headed by, of course, former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet. And indeed, our support this year is $7.5 million to the core budget. And there's several different parts of our contribution. There's our actual contribution to the core budget of UN Women. And then we also look for opportunities for additional program support and so forth. And so in each year we've tried to increase it a bit. Is it what we'd like? No, of course we'd like to contribute even more. But our request is that at this point we've moved it up to 7.5 million in the immediate core budget. We of course have an entry in each year for FY13, working on FY14 and so forth. But we'll of course see what our final appropriation that comes out. What it'll actually come out to be. The other thing we try to do is actually find opportunities to actually act closely with the UN Women team, because as a relatively new organization, they're also setting up their own processes. They're implementing the strategic plan laid out by Michelle Bachelet. We also are working with them in a practical help on some of the organizational efforts in terms of making themselves effective organizations as they try to expand their field presence as well. So it's both the monetary contribution, but we also try to be involved as they're creating their structures because they're still relatively new. So, thank you. Maybe in the back.
I'd like, thank you, Ms. Eleanor Dwight from Colorado. I'd like a little point of clarification about the relationship of the U.S. to the UN peacekeepers. You mentioned that we are training UN peacekeepers. Do we also have contractors working in our UN peacekeeper situation?
Well, the most important area that I flagged is that the peacekeeping support that's supplied by our political military bureau here, which trains the national contingents of several countries that then contribute those national contingents to the United Nations, and so that through our peacekeeping support efforts, that that we train, I say, many of the forces, for example, that are involved from several of the sub-Saharan African countries are actually trained by the U.S. And then they turn and either then work in United Nations operations, or several of them also in the African Union operation in Somalia as well. And that's been an ongoing U.S. bilateral program that effectively supports the peacekeepers, and it means that they get world-class training on military practices, which they then can use in the peacekeeping setting. And it's designed to be used in a peacekeeping setting, and the training is for countries that supply peacekeepers. I'm sorry, you had a second question?
Well, I was asking about the relationship of contractors within the peacekeepers, because I have a friend who worked for a contractor as a UN peacekeeper, and I was quite surprised.
Well, honestly, most of our peace, I don't, if somewhere out of the 115,000, some of those contractors, but the ones we were really looking at are the ones I was describing are people where we're training the national forces of governments, which are then contribute as part of the normal effort through the Department of Peacekeeping Operations to UN peacekeeping efforts, and that's the main thrust that we provide. Please, gentleman back here.
Yashar Vasa from Iowa UNA. We're working in Des Moines with the refugee group from the Nuba Mountains, and I was wondering if you could assess that situation. You might be aware, hot off the presses in the New York Times, Christoph just had a scathing assessment of the Obama administration's leadership role regarding Nuba Mountains. I don't think I've ever seen the phrase Nuba Mountains come out of the mouth of the president, and I'm a little disappointed. I just wanted to see what your assessment of that situation is, and if the U.S. is working to take on a leadership role, perhaps in the Security Council, to hold the Khartoum regime responsible.
The United States has been one of the most active supporters in trying to bring peace between Sudan and now between Sudan and South Sudan of any country in the United Nations. And I will say that that it was quite clear, if we just take just the past 3 years, that not only was the administration a strong supporter of the push to actually implement the stages of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, to actually help support the peacekeeping operations that provided the structure to have the July 11th referendum. And as you recall, there was active diplomatic engagement at the highest levels by the president and his representatives to help shepherd the process through to the referendum. Think about it. That was extraordinary. The idea that you'd actually be able to have that referendum conducted and the creation of two countries, that was extraordinary. Are we happy with the current situation? No, we'd like this to be, of course, to be a peaceful situation, but we are strong supporters in our active bilateral diplomacy. As you know, there was a session at the, in New York at the General Assembly just on Sudan that we attended and helped as part of the follow-up. Not only that, as you know, we're the largest supporters of peacekeeping operations. $1 and $3 in all of peacekeeping goes to Sudan. There are 3 peacekeeping operations there. Obviously, we're strong supporters of them, not only financially, but in terms of political force, and to continue to try to press both in Darfur, we haven't forgotten Darfur, as well as at the border issues as well. So I'd say the United States is deeply committed. Is this one of the hardest questions on the planet? Yes, it is. And figuring out what the right mix is incredibly tough. But we think it's important that we, along with other partners, are trying to continue the day-in, day-out work of working on the Operation Sudan. And I give a special shout-out to Princeton Lyman, former Assistant Secretary and Ambassador, who really does the day-in, day-out hard work of the United States support situation to that particular situation.